We begin our story today in Berlin in 1938. The Nazis have been in government in Germany for 5 years. Since 1933, Fritz Ball has been barred from his profession as a lawyer and is working as a soap salesman.
It's a difficult time with so little to do. Very depressing. I walk from one office of a former colleague to another. At every office, someone offers me a cigar, and usually someone makes an order of the soap products I sell now. I can't get used to life anymore. I'm getting serious about music again. After 20 years of focusing only on paid work, I surrender in the hands of a grandmaster and start studying cello again. The last 20 years, my technique has been lost. My law practice has swallowed up my time. It takes a lot of energy to regain the level I played at before, but music is in my blood. Until the putsch, I was hopeful that everything would be fine. If Hindenburg dies and Hitler gets the power alone, I know there will be no reason for hope anymore. The German National Socialists will have won. We're all going to have to leave. Music will have to be my salvation. I sell soap and I practice music. I write poems that I send to friends with a request to buy soap. That is, in 1938, the fate of a well-known lawyer from Berlin.
The Ball family managed to secure permission for their eldest son Peter to leave Germany. He is going to travel to New York, where he'll live with an aunt. He is 15 and leaving behind his parents and 2 younger brothers. In his memoir, Fritz muses on how he felt at this time.
In the summer of 1938, it started to become unbearable. The only thing that offers any relaxation is my cello. With a group, we play in a quartet. For a few months now, we are not allowed to visit a film, no theatres and no restaurants. And outside on the street, we can only sit on special Jewish benches. No one wants to take over as conductor of the Jewish orchestra. We practice every week in a synagogue. We're only allowed to play Jewish or foreign composers. They persuade me to be the conductor so that this little rest in our lives isn't lost. Almost every week the exercise is interrupted. I get a visit from the Gestapo and am being followed on the street. At the end of October 1938, on the night before my son leaves the country, we host the string quartet in our house. My son wants to hear his favourite music, Beethoven, Opus 59, No. 1 and Schubert's D major quartet. At home, we still dare to play German composers. As long as there are fewer than 8 people, we don't have to form the Gestapo.
On the night of the 9th and the 10th of November 1938, Jewish communities throughout Germany are violently attacked in the pogrom known as Kristallnacht. Fritz and his brother are both arrested and interned in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. They are forced to do hard labour in the freezing cold.
The heavy lorry is pushed on the narrow train tracks at breathless speed. When the cars collide, it crashes hard. The place is indescribable. After a while, the man next to me asks, "Why didn't you leave in time?" I answer briefly, "We couldn't." And as it kept slugging and waiting for the freight wagons to be loaded, moved, emptied and pushed back, I think about why we couldn't get out. Only yesterday, my friend Pachter said to me, "Yes, you see, Fritz, if we had immigrated before, we could have saved ourselves this." And he added, "Be careful with your hands. Think of your cello." We are now in Sachsenhausen together. We know each other because we played in a quartet for 5 years. He played viola, I played the cello. For him, music is pure recreation. For me, it has become more and more the most important part of my life, my study and my future, and sometimes also my current life profession. As I work, 2 melodies go through my head all the time, 2 themes of Mozart. I keep going through the music and suddenly I know why. We played these works the night the first arrests begun in June 1933. Since then, we've tried everything in our power to get out, but everything was in vain. Only my eldest son is gone. My son, who I love so dearly, who was so talented. Just over 15, he left Germany all alone. He's on his way to America. I don't know if he's there yet, but he should have landed a few days ago.
In January 1939, Fritz is released from Sachsenhausen after 61 days. Frostbite and an attempt at surgery by a fellow inmate have left his hands permanently damaged.
My left hand is better now, only the joints of the fingers are stiff. My right hand won't heal. The doctor treats it with light radiation, but that only makes the situation worse. It will take weeks before the large bandage can be removed. I'm not giving up hope of playing the music again. I try it first with my left hand. As soon as 2 fingers are bandaged, I start practicing. I'm making good progress. Every day I practice when no one can see me. I'll take the bow in my left hand, I put it in my right hand. The fingers are still connected with a bandage, except for the thumb, which has recovered. I strike 2 centimetres and the bow falls. I pick it up and start over. After 10 minutes, I put the cello in the corner, but I try it again in the afternoon. I start from the beginning, and every time the bow falls out of my fully stiffened, numb and bandaged fingers. Friends of doctors and musicians advise me to resign to the fact that I will no longer be able to play. The first time I play that B major trio of Brahms, which starts with the beautiful cello solo, we all have to cry. I am determined to play again. It's the will that counts and nothing else. I came out of Sachsenhausen alive because I wanted to stay alive, because I wanted to play the cello.
By the spring of 1939, Fritz and Eva have got permission to leave Germany and go to the USA. But they can't go straight away. It'll be at least 2 years before the USA let them in, and the bad situation in Germany is getting worse and worse.
At the end of 1938, we got our exit papers for the United States. There is a waiting list. It will take at least 2 years before we can leave. The Gestapo is starting to bother us. Friends have already been pressured. If they don't leave soon, they will be sent back to the concentration camp. It is difficult to find a country that is willing to take us. In February, I get the offer to go to England and wait there until the United States will take us. We are very pleased, but this only applies to me and my wife. Friends in England arranged for my 2 youngest children to be transported to England on the Kinder transport. We follow a few months later. After 61 days in Sachsenhausen, I have no other feeling than that this country no longer is my country. I have no doubt what to do anymore. We go by train to Hamburg, and from there we take an American ship to England. My wife and I stand on the deck of the ship, hand in hand in deep silence. We leave Germany with 10 shillings in our pocket, some suitcases, and my cello. We must leave the land of our parents and ancestors and leave everything behind us that gave meaning to our lives. The language, the culture, the scenery, and the people.
Fritz and Eva managed to secure places on the Kinder transport for their 2 younger sons, Dieter and Thomas, in March 1939. The young boys leave their parents behind and travel to England. A few weeks later, in May 1939, Fritz and Eva are finally able to leave Germany themselves. After a brief stay in London, they arrive in Newmarket.
We take the train to a small town 2 hours north of London, where a wealthy Englishman has provided a house for refugees. We are picked up at the station by a German-speaking member of the local committee. She takes us in her car to the house, which is a few minutes away from the train station and is located in the middle of the city. At the gate of our new home, we are greeted very kindly by a grey-haired woman from Hamburg who leads us to our room. It's hardly bigger than our ship's cabin was, but it's friendly. Our window looks out onto a spacious, very clean square, at the end of which there are stables for horses. Soon, the lady's husband joins us. He was also imprisoned in Sachsenhausen, so we like each other immediately. The bedrooms are all furnished the same. All the work is done by refugees who live here. The common areas consist of a large dining room with 2 long tables and a spacious living room comfortably furnished with armchairs, radio, and a piano which is out of tune. The garden is a wonderfully manicured lawn, which we can use. We see immediately that our life will be easier here. In the morning, when someone knocks on the door, it's the milkman and not the Gestapo officer. We soon feel at home, but we have a feeling that living together with so many people in such small quarters, especially in winter, won't be easy.
While settling into his new surroundings, Fritz becomes an observer of English culture and society, from the English obsession with their pets, to the weather, to people's clothing choices.
It strikes me how many dogs and cats there are in this country, and that the social position of these animals in relation to human society is quite different. The dogs and the cats look much better than in Germany. Almost all the dogs I see, and also many cats, have an almost aristocratic appearance. The scraggly animals which once encountered in the streets of Berlin and so in the countryside are not known here. And there are so many cats here. How rarely have we seen them in Berlin? How rarely even in the small towns? Here, every house has at least one cat.
The cold is unpleasant, it is moist, and even at the temperature that is still a few degrees above the freezing point, one's hands get terribly cold. As a result, all people wear gloves, and the size of this garment, the size of the fur-lined giant gloves, arouses our greatest astonishment. The English winter is hard to bear because of its wet cold than the dry cold that prevails in our country. There is a lot to write about: the open fireplaces, the construction of the English houses, the draughts in the rooms, but it's still summer.
The British wear very colourful clothes. The lack of the sun in the country makes it desirable to dress yourself as colourfully as possible. The way even older women dress in screaming colours is something hard to get used to as a foreigner. On the European continent, where there is more and sometimes too much sun, the darker the clothes. The English lack a good sense of mixing colours, or we lack the sense of finding this colourful mix of red, yellow, green, purple, blue and orange appealing. Even the man in England dresses much more colourfully than the man on the continent. Shirts, vests, trousers, collar, everything's a different colour, and the bright colour of the jackets are particularly striking.
Despite the restrictions hanging over the refugees, Fritz and Eva are still able to explore their new surroundings in Newmarket.
The nature is so strikingly beautiful. The many pastures and meadows and the many lawns. The sanctity of the lawn that I was taught as a child is unknown here. I was never allowed to walk on the lawn in our garden. The gardener had to water the grass for hours in the summer to keep it green. The green lawns were more valuable than the flowers. In the Tiergarten Park in Berlin, special guards made sure that the children did not play on the lawns. How different it is in England. Our city is surrounded by huge green parks. On the first walk, we see an endless park that rises slowly and reaches as far as the eye can see. My wife asks a passerby if we are allowed to enter the park. He's astonished at the question, and he adds well-meaningfully and politely we should be more careful when we come to the road that crosses the park, because the cars there drive very fast. So we know that the road is for automobiles, and the park is for pedestrians, horses and sport. Even in the summer, the lawns are eternally green.
During the summer of 1939, many Newmarket locals invite the Palace House Stable refugees to their houses for social gatherings. Fritz finds the trickiest thing to navigate on those occasions is communicating when he has had his fill of cups of tea.
My most terrible memory is the eternal misunderstanding about the cups of tea I want to drink. I'm invited to tea and I've already drunk 2 big cups. People ask me if I want another and I say, thank you, by which I mean, thank you for the tea, but I don't need any more. But that is incorrect, so they pour me a new cup of tea, which out of courtesy, I can't refuse. So I'm forced to drink a 3rd cup of tea. All the guests have already finished their meal and the host asks me, with a smile, if I want a cup of tea. Unaware of what I'm doing, I say, thank you, again. And she grabs my cup for the 4th time and fills it with the precious liquid. While everyone smiles at me and marvels at my thirst. How many cups of tea did I have to drink in the first months of my stay in England until I learned to say no thank you when I no longer wanted tea?
Fritz quickly becomes part of the musical scene in Newmarket, with invitations coming for him to play his cello in local concerts, often alongside other talented musicians among the refugees. In England, they have the freedom to play the pieces which had been forbidden to them under the Nazis.
We receive an invitation to a church tea. This is the first time we've been asked for such an event, and in this way, we will soon get to know more residents of Newmarket. The first concert in the church is followed by further invitations. They are modest things that I play in public, but I receive friendly critique in the newspaper. The people here rarely have an opportunity to hear a good cellist. In this way, especially with the accompaniment of the organ, we can play pieces that we, as Jews, were no longer allowed to play in Germany. People are moved by the simple classical melodies. I play at the inauguration ceremony of our hostel about 2 months after our arrival. The Viennese ladies bake delicious cakes and Viennese specialities, and the evening goes very nicely. We have a singer, a pianist, and me as a cellist. The visitors are highly satisfied with the achievements of their refugees.
once was invited to tea and asked to bring my cello. I met a professional pianist, Miss Smith, in the house who lived there as a subtenant. The owners of the house were two older ladies and their cat. As usual, the conversation over tea revolved almost exclusively around the cat, what kind of cakes, fish, pastries it prefers. A strange thing for me to talk about, but by now I'm used to such conversations. Then I am asked to play. I played a sonata by Handel, a sonata by Beethoven, and the cello concerto by Haydn. And when the music is finished, the ladies of the house say, "We were very curious how our cat would react to your playing. Usually when Miss Smith plays the piano, the cat howls and runs away. Did you notice how quiet the cat was while you were playing? Did you notice how she sharpened her ears while you were playing the last piece? What was that music? We don't know much about this music." When I said it was Haydn, they reply, "That must be her favourite composer. Don't we have such a musical cat?"
Amazingly, this was not the only musical cat Fritz came across during his time in Newmarket.
In our town, we noticed a lady on the street. She plays the violin, her sister plays the cello. They don't like classical music. Mozart, Beethoven, even Haydn they dislike. They play light music. They ask if they might invite me for their musical evenings. My wife accepts the invitation thankfully, and we go. I have rarely seen anything as funny as the older violin-playing sister. She even wears a hat on her head in the house when she plays the violin, and the tone of her violin is just as bright as the colours of her clothes. They have a small repertoire, and I know exactly when they will start playing and when they will stop again. The colourfully decorated first violin will jump up with the hat on her head because she has a fast run to play, and she can only do that while standing. When the music slows down, she sits down again. A very old, very gentle cat sometimes plays along, which doesn't disturb the ladies at all. She jumps on the piano, marches around on the keys, and makes the additional accompaniment that she thinks is good. It's truly a musical cat, and I just sit back and try to enjoy.
Fritz found the English people to be polite and pleasant, but they did not always want to hear the uncomfortable truths that the Palace House Stables refugees had to tell.
What struck me most about the Englishmen was their pleasant attitudes. This has always touched me because of the behaviour of the German men in the period before we left the country. The essence of the British nation and their tendency to not dwell on unpleasantness makes life easy and pleasing. It is also difficult for a German to understand because the tendency to not want to see the unpleasantness, putting their heads in the sand, carried great dangers. With all the kindness to us as refugees, they know only 2 words: don't worry, forget it. They don't want to hear about the conditions in Nazi Germany, nothing about the concentration camps, robbery and abuse. They don't want to know these things. They can't believe them. They don't want to know the truth.
The following morning we are in the garden when the news comes that the German army has invaded Poland. Hours of extreme tension, last attempts at negotiations. England is at war with Germany. We have once again become enemy aliens, and so we will remain, even though Germany has expelled us, even though we are soon denied our citizenship and our leftover property is confiscated. We remain enemy aliens, even though every Englishman should know that he cannot have a better ally than the Jew expelled from Germany or Austria. We remain enemy aliens, even though our relatives serve in the Pioneer Corps. We remain so when it is known that those who are left behind in Germany are sent to Poland and systematically exterminated in gas chambers.
Because England does not recognise Hitler's principle of race, they treat us as enemies of the country, to whom they have given refuge from persecution by the Nazi regime. Even though everything in Germany has been taken away, honour, homeland, position, wealth, even though we have languished in concentration camps, and finally, even though our relatives who cannot escape have been exterminated. They treat us much worse than any British citizen who happened to be stranded in Germany during the war.
We spent 4.5 happy months in England, 4.5 months in which we are very grateful to the English people. These months were like an oasis in the desert years of bleak life. When the Commissioner of the Bloomsbury House arrives, we have to gather in the dining room. We all have to remain standing while he speaks. We will most probably be interned.
On the 12th of May, Pentecost Sunday, a police officer appears in our house at 7 o'clock in the morning. We're informed that no one is allowed to leave the house until the police come back. He says that all men are to be interned.
The ladies make polite objections. They draw attention to the fact that we are the victims of the Nazis, that we were expelled as non-Germans, that we received the C status from the court, and that most of the gentlemen were in the concentration camps in Germany. They point to my handicapped hand caused by Nazi imprisonment.
The officials reply that we will certainly not be held long. We will all be back in 24 hours. My wife is not at all reassured. She does not want to let me be dragged away for the 3rd time. The police inspector reassures her that it will only be very short term, that he has the instructions from the Home Office to arrest all men under 60, and that he must follow his instructions. My wife is crying. She is suffering terribly. The winds from Germany are still too fresh. To be interned twice because one is viewed to be a Jew and not a German, and then to come here and to be interned because you are a German is too much for us.
All the love and gratitude we felt for England has disappeared in one day. It was difficult to leave Germany and get a visa to stay in England. After the outbreak of the war, a court was set up and everything was examined. And still, victims of the Nazi regime, the survivors of the concentration camps, the best friends that England has, are now being arrested.
In May of 1940, Fritz was arrested and taken to Bury St. Edmund, and then on to the Isle of Man, where he was held with other Germans, Jews and non-Jews alike. He was released 4 months later and returned to Newmarket with Eva, and they moved to private housing in Cambridge and lived in Britain until 1946, when they made their way to the United States with their 2 sons. One of them was my father. My father married another German immigrant, and 12 years later, I was born. I knew the story about my parents and how they met, but I didn't know the rest. I'd like to tell you about how I found out about it, but first let me introduce myself. I'm Sarah Ball, Fritz and Eva's granddaughter, and I've been working with the Suffolk Archives, the National Horseracing Museum, and Orchestras Live New for more than a year on this project. And somehow I feel at a loss to be able to express how moved I am and how touched by the kindness of everyone and by their dedication to my grandfather's story. About 15 years ago, I was given Fritz's manuscript. I knew that it was gold and that I only had to find the right people who would enjoy it and appreciate it as much as I did. And I finally found you. Having grown up in the States, I now live in Holland. I study and I teach storytelling. This project is proof of the power of storytelling. Fritz and Eva were just regular people, nothing special. They just happened to live and to have survived at the cusp of history. And Fritz had the foresight to write his memories down. That has opened up a box of treasures for my family and for Newmarket. After immigrating to the United States, my grandparents lived in New York. They lived in a tiny walk-up with thin walls. The neighbors complained about the cello playing, and so Fritz had to practice with his bow in the air. In his next apartment with bigger walls, he added a grand piano. He had a big tape recorder with that old-fashioned kinds of real big tapes, and he taped himself playing duets. First the cello part, and then the piano. My grandfather never gave up. In a letter to a friend in 1967, he wrote, "Old people complain of loneliness. We're all alone. My wife's been sick for years, and I've been nursing her. I do the housekeeping, and I try to keep my head high. We see life not in what we achieve, but in the way we live our lives, in the willingness to help each other, in the music, in books, and in all things of culture." I'm the youngest of 5 grandchildren. My grandfather died when I was 18. He had survived his 3 sons and his wife. My dad had died 4 years before. I hardly remember my grandmother, Eva. She had developed early dementia shortly before I was born. I was small when she was put in a mental institution, only to die shortly afterwards. I feel like I can count the memories of my grandfather on one hand. I know my grandfather was a gentleman, always wearing a suit and a hat. He made me laugh even though his English was really, really bad. But he was also a bit of a hypochondriac and sometimes a difficult man. Losing my father at 14 was very hard, and my parents had divorced. My father had moved back to New York. I grew up in the Midwest. He was living with my grandfather, and I was angry about my loss of my father, and mostly angry at my grandfather. That would have been the end of the story had it not been for my grandfather's manuscript, his insistence of writing down his story, which was miraculously given to me 30 years after his death. You see, I have a favorite aunt who lives in New Jersey. I visit her every year, and she almost always has a present for me when I come. One year she gave me Fritz's wedding ring. One year I got his cello, and the next year she gave me a manuscript written by my grandfather about his last years in Germany and his status as a refugee in England. As I read it, I realized that my sensitive, self-centered, artistic grandfather had been imprisoned 3 times, twice in Germany, including 6 months of hard labor in Sachsenhausen. Lucky to have fled Germany, he was given a grand welcome in Newmarket, only to be arrested a third time shortly after World War II started. And all the Germans, men, Jews and non-Jews, were all considered to be enemy aliens, forced to give up his career, lose all his wealth, and rebuild his life several times. My grandfather's manuscript is one of perseverance, of hope for a better future in a time of unbelievable loss and pain. I wish he could have told me the story himself, and I'm forgiving myself for my teenage anger, and I'm now giving him the respect that he deserves. About a year ago, I decided to do something with Fritz's story, with his cello and with his love for music. I had this wild idea of a performance where someone would play the cello and then they would read from his manuscript, just what has happened today. So you can't imagine how moved my husband and I are to be here today. But before I could do that, I needed to get the information about the cello together. So I started digging in the manuscript, looking for references, the things that you've heard today. Fritz writes that he gave concerts in Newmarket and got good reviews, so I contacted the Suffolk Archive, and my email has snowballed into this project. During our first calls, you all quoted from his story better than I could. You now have a small army of people filling in the story. My grandfather has not only opened up my personal locked family history, but also the story, which was little known, of refugees in Newmarket. You talk about Fritz as if he is your grandfather too, and I'm happy to share him with you. Each of us has stories which need telling, just like my grandfather's. Storytelling inspires us. It moves us to action. It tells us something about who we are and where we come from. Storytelling lifts our daily interactions and experiences into universal memories. It gives us hope, even in moments of fear and despair, in war and discrimination. I am so lucky that my grandfather wrote this manuscript, that he hid it in a box, and that my aunt picked me out to do something with it. I want to share it with the world, and I am deeply, deeply moved that you will also want to understand the story of Fritz and how it links to that of other refugees, to Newmarket, and to the importance of hospitality to those who have suffered and to those who have traveled from far. I think Ava and Fritz, my father and his brothers, are looking down at us and laughing. I'm sure they don't think that they deserve all this fuss, but I am proud. The past year, I've often been moved to tears and touched by your kindness. Thank you all.